Welcome to the Bible and today's culture. I want to remind you of this diagram which says what we are looking at was God's principles applied to a biblical situation 3,500 years ago. So the application here of God's principles is going to be different than how we apply them in a 21st century culture. It's like borrowing a bull or borrowing somebody's pickup. Okay? It's different because we're in a different culture. So we're looking at business and economics in the past, and we found out that one of the objectives of business and economics was that there should be no poor among you. We looked at science and health, and one of the major objectives there is that we keep people healthy so they don't need a miracle from God to make their life work. And now we're in the subject of government, and the main thrust here is justice. Just a reminder, the objectives that we're looking for are authority comes from the bottom up. People elect the government. The government is representative of the people. The government should be as local as possible. The primary responsibility of the government is justice. Justice follows written laws. It's a contract like our Constitution. And the government and the church are separated. And that's going to be what we talk about today. So here's a story about the Bible and centralized government. Remembering that God submits to the will of the people in the government that they get. All right, so here's a story from Samuel. The elders of Israel said, "You, Samuel, are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint us a king to lead us, such as other nations have." Well, the problem here is that Samuel had two sons who were also secondary priests, but they were taking over a lot for their dad, Samuel, as he was getting older. And they were crooked, okay? And they would take things that they shouldn't take from the people to their benefit. And the people were sad of crooked priests taking part of their sacrifice for themselves. So Samuel knew his kids were unjust, but he didn't do anything about it. And worse than that, he appointed them future judges. So now the people are saying, we put up with these guys because we like their dad, but now they're going to be the judges. We don't want to live in that sort of unjust society because these guys are not going to work out. So they came to Samuel and said, no, appoint us a king. Well, Samuel went to God and said, God, these guys are asking me to appoint a king. And God said, well, the first thing you need to do is tell them why that's a bad idea. But if they choose it, they choose it. So here's what Samuel told the people. God says it's a bad idea. The king will make soldiers of your sons. They're just going to be working on your farm to take it over when you die. There's somebody else competing for their livelihood, for their time. He will create a professional military that will be there all the time, not just when you're in trouble. He will take the best of your farms. He's got to feed his soldiers. He will take your servants to run his farms. People you've trained, he needs them to run his farms. He will make many people work on weapons for war. Now there's another industry started. He'll take your daughters to be his cooks. And he'll tax your income to pay for all of this. And the people thought about it and they said, nah, we want a king. It works for other families, other countries. We don't like how it's working here lately. Both Eli and Samuel had bad children. So Samuel said to them, when the day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. God is living up to his statement of saying, this is a bottoms-up operation, the government. People get the government that they choose, and when they complain about it, they need to realize it was their responsibility. The primary role of government is justice. Here's some scripture, just a few of the things. In fact, 26 out of the 39 books in the Old Testament talk about justice. It's the most popular subject around almost. Here's one. Enough, you princes of Israel, you leaders of Israel, put away violence and destruction and practice justice. This verse, you shall not prevent the justice due to an alien or an orphan, people who can't defend for themselves. Okay, on and on with justice issues. It's important to God. You shall not distort justice. You shall not be partial. You shall not take a bribe. You tithe even the tiniest part of your income, but you completely forget about justice. That comes from the New Testament in Luke. The strength of the king loves justice. They saw that the wisdom of God was in him, that meaning Solomon, to administer justice. This one, administer justice every morning and deliver the person who has been robbed from the power of his oppressor. Justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Justice is key in God's mind as to the reason that the government is there. Now he gives us 6 court cases as models of what you do to produce justice. So justice in action, court case number 1. Did you know the Bible had court cases in it? Do you have examples of what the judges were supposed to do? Here they are. If a man's bull injures the bull of another and it dies, they shall sell the live one and divide both the money and the dead animal equally. However, if it was known that the bull had a habit of goring, yet the owner did not keep him penned up, the owner must pay, animal for animal, and the dead animal will be his. Case number 2. If a man grazes his livestock in a field or a vineyard and lets them stray, and they graze in another man's field, he must make restitution from the best of his own field or vineyard. That's in Exodus. So one of the challenges you might do sometime with your group that's studying this is take these court cases and translate them into 21st century cases with similar causes and see how you work out a justice system based on these models. Case number 3. If a fire breaks out and spreads into the thorn bushes so that it burns shocks of grain or standing grain or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make restitution. Case 4. If a man gives his neighbor silver or gold or goods for safekeeping, and they are stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if he is caught, must pay back double. But if the thief is not found, the owner of the house must appear before the judges to determine whether he has laid hands on the other man's property. Case 5. If a man borrows an animal from his neighbor and it is injured or dies while the owner is not present, he must make restitution. That's a borrowed animal. But if the owner is with the animal, the borrower will not have to pay. The owner should have been responsible. If the animal was hired, the money paid for hire covers the loss. Case 6, final one. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or any other lost property, about which someone says, "This is mine," both parties are to bring their cases before the judges. The one whom the judges declare guilty must pay back double to his neighbor. Here's the summary in Amos. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. The main job of government is to provide justice to people. And if you begin to listen to the news, keep asking your question, is this news article about a justice issue? And you will find it's one of the primary concerns of our country today. We may not use the word that way, but it is. So let me tell you a story about justice gained and justice lost. This is a story about after the Civil War, from 1865 to 1880. The justice was gained by the North losing 360,000 lives to bring justice to the slaves. And this is what happened. Over 50% of the slaves became literate in 15 years. And it isn't just the kids, it's the adults and everybody. 50% of them became literate when they were not allowed to attend schools beforehand. Negroes built and taught their own schools. They got their kids into education immediately after the war was over. Former slaves started farms and businesses everywhere. 2 of the slaves became U.S. senators. 12 became congressmen. And 2,000 were elected to public office. Black universities were started. There was an explosion of kingdom gifts. All of a sudden, these people who had no choices in their life of what to do began to do what they were made for, being in government, being in business, being in schools. It was an explosion of abilities that had been locked up for centuries. But that ended in 1876 to 1880. Then the Jim Crow laws negated almost all the gains. So how did this all happen? In 1876, there was an election for president between Hayes and Tilden. The election wasn't decided. There were 3 southern states whose votes were contested. And after months, they had not decided who had won the election in each of those states. So finally, and Hayes was a Republican, Tilden was a Democrat. He was the one favored by the South. But the southern states came to the Republican president and said, if you promise us something, we will vote for you. So they said, what you have to do is you have to promise to remove the occupation troops, the northern occupation troops, from the southern states. Well, the northern occupation troops were there to protect the blacks, and particularly to protect their voting rights, which is why they elected senators and congressmen and 2,000 people to public office. Hayes agreed. He came to office and he withdrew the troops. There was nobody creating justice for the black people, and the Jim Crow laws came in, which prevented them from voting, which prevented them from getting loans, which prevented them from running their businesses as they had run before. The next black senator that came into office was 1967, almost 100 years later. We worked hard for justice, and we lost justice in the United States. And it was a sad time. So think about these questions. Which is more important, equality or liberty? If you had to make a choice. It says, if you choose equality, you will likely end up having neither equality or liberty. We'll talk more about that. If you choose liberty, you will likely end up having both liberty and equality. This is the rationale behind this. Equality alone means you have to take something from somebody else and give it to another. The result is there's less liberty and there's less justice. It's like if the baseball season represented equality, equity, that means every batter would bat 200. And at the end of the season, every team would be tied for first place. So, liberty in baseball really means that you have found a place to execute your gifts, your skills. You were given those abilities. You didn't create them. You're a good batter. You're a good thrower. But you've worked hard to execute that. So, to have liberty, you have to be able to execute your God-given abilities. So, in other words, liberty and equity mean that you have to have the freedom to become equal any way you desire, the way you've been gifted. That means there is much more liberty and justice going around when you are not like everybody else. You're like who God made you to be. So every person has the right to be unique. You have your own goals, your own purposes. Liberty means that you have the right to be who you are and everyone else. The goal is not to be the same as everybody. The goal is to be fulfilled, to be living by your passions, by your gifts, by God's calling in your life. So, it's not to be the same. It's to be part of an organization, a country, a government that allows you to be who you are and protects your right to be that way and protects everybody else's right to be who God made them to be. Here's some interesting discussion questions, a little longer. I think they're different than others we had. I hope you enjoy taking them. When you're through, take a look at a speech from Ronald Reagan. And he's talking about religion and politics, but really he's talking about his place in relationship to God as President of the United States, not necessarily, or I don't think in any way, about his political point of view. So next week we're going to get together and talk about the Bible and centralized government. So enjoy the discussion questions.